Hello everyone, and welcome to our Primary Innovation webinar. We run these monthly, and I want to say thanks again to John James, who does an amazing job making it actually work in terms of the process and all the technical bits and pieces behind the scenes. So thank you again, John. We really appreciate that you're part of this and make it all happen. So we have a monthly webinar that we've just been starting to run this year, and today we've got MS Srinivasan from NIWA here in Christchurch speaking. Before I go further and introduce MS, I do want to welcome everyone to from the Primary Innovation Program, but also others, because I know that this webinar invitation has gone to people who are part of the Primary Innovation Program, so that's a big MB-funded program led by Ag Research with a whole number of organisations that are part of it. But also there's a whole heap of other people who are interested in this irrigation management area that MS is going to talk about. So welcome and thank you for coming along. Hope type lots of questions and make this interactive, because that always helps. So MS is a hydrologist, and he's worked with NIWA since 2008. He's interested in irrigation, drainage, runoff generation and contaminant transport at small catchments at scales, and he's been leading the innovation project on the application of co-innovation principles for improved water management in an irrigation scheme north of Christchurch. So that's the Waimakariri irrigation scheme, and that innovation project is part of this primary innovation program funded by MB here in New Zealand. So yeah, I'm going to hand over to MS now, and you can ask questions as you go, and look forward to hearing what MS has got to say. Thanks.
Thanks, Dennis. Thanks for this introduction. This is MS from NIWA Christchurch. It's a nice and sunny weather here. Thanks for being here at the seminar, or the webinar. I'm going to talk about application of co-innovation principles to water management, specifically to irrigation water management in an irrigation scheme. We are running this case study since 2012-13 irrigation season, and this is part of, as Dennis mentioned, primary innovation case study, primary innovation MB project. First, I'll start with an acknowledgement to the WIMAC irrigation scheme who are hosting us doing this project, this case study, which I'll go through in the next few slides. Also, the funding is coming from NIWA core funds, from the Freshwater Center, as well as the Primary Innovation Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, MB funds. The plan for the day, first I'm going to talk a little about the irrigation in New Zealand, what that means to New Zealand and why it is important, or what's happening in the irrigation scheme, irrigation scene currently in the country. What are the approaches to irrigation water management? What is that we are doing currently, and where are the bottlenecks and what we are doing with that one? Then I'll go into the case study where I'll talk about the WIMAC irrigation scheme, what they are doing and how we are interacting with them, how we are working with the different irrigation stakeholders and the farmers in the scheme. And I will end the talk with a couple of examples on how co-learning is happening in the scheme. As I go through this one, I need to remind you, this is a project that is ongoing. We are towards somewhere between the 60% time of the project, so still there is another 40% to go. So if you have any suggestions as I go through this one, I'm happy to take those on board, and hopefully we can use it in the coming years. Irrigation is the biggest and expanding user of water in the country. Almost 80% of the water that we are using is going to irrigation, and especially Canterbury, where we are located, Christchurch, and the irrigation scheme WIMAC is the biggest user of irrigation water in New Zealand. What is happening is, over the last few years, as the dairy industry is expanding, we are getting more lands going under irrigation. Some of those lands may or may not be the best lands for irrigation, but still we are doing it. The philosophy of irrigation, or the strategy of irrigation, has been more just in case irrigation type as opposed to just in time. The just in case irrigation is, we will apply the irrigation. It doesn't matter whether the soil or the crop needs water at the time. Just because we got the water, or this water may not be available for us tomorrow or the day after, we will apply the irrigation now to make sure that there is enough water in the soil. Some people like to see the grass green, so they end up applying irrigation even when there is no need. as opposed to just-in-time irrigation where you measure how much water is needed and whether there is water is needed at the time that you are wanting to apply the irrigation and practicing it as such. The second point I'm talking about is a continuing improvement. We have been working with irrigation for the last 30, 40, 50 number of years. Initially, it used to be flood irrigation, as you see in the photograph on that slide, where we open a gate and let the water to flow over land into the irrigation, into the paddock, and let it irrigate. The good thing about this one is it doesn't need very much of infrastructure, except you need a canal that brings the water into the stream or into the pond or into the farm, and you open a gate and you irrigate. The disadvantages, you end up applying a lot more water than what you need, especially when the water has to flow a long way to the other end of the field. That is not very efficient. Sometimes you have to start irrigating much earlier than what you need because the water for that to reach the other end may take time to do that. The other one is the competing demand. There are other industries that use water, recreation or hydropower or urban and industry. They all need the water at the same time, which is the peak of the summer, as these people, the farmers, they need. So there is always a competing demand for water in Canterbury and in New Zealand. So we have to justify the use of irrigation in all these times. So improvement to irrigations. As I said before in the last slide, we are moving from flood irrigation towards spray irrigation in New Zealand. That is a very good improvement, and that is one of the low-hanging fruits that we are able to get to it very quickly. Farmers, by going to the spray irrigation, they have better control as when they want to irrigate, sometimes just a flick of a switch from inside a house or a farm gate, that you can do all those things as opposed to walking around the farm and opening and closing the gates in case of the flood irrigation. The next one is the soil moisture monitoring. It has been happening for the last 30 years, but the uptake has been very stagnant. It has been around 18 to 20%. Part of the reason could be the technology wasn't really that well developed in 1980s and 90s. Now we got very good soil moisture sensors that are giving the data right every 5 minutes. But farmers do not know what to do with the data. Usually the soil moisture sensors, they give soil moisture in percentage, but the farmers apply the irrigation in millimeters. So there needs to be a conversion to be done. So they get the numbers, but they don't know what to do with the numbers. So there has to be some kind of an intelligence applied to that number to make sure that can be converted into some kind of an irrigation depth that they can use it. So that has kind of stagnated the uptake of it, but the main reason is the unreliable supplies. When supplies are not reliable, when they are taking water out of groundwater or river, or they don't get that water at the time that they need, then there is a question, do we even need to measure the demand? Because we don't control the supply. So whenever you get the supply, you apply the water. That is, what's the point in measuring the demand when I cannot match my demand both in time and in magnitude? So that has kind of put a brake on the uptake of the technology. When we started this project, we wanted to look at that one, how we can promote that uptake of the technology. Then we also added another layer to this one, saying that in a country like New Zealand, where we get rainfall uniformly throughout the year, we should be able to manage our irrigation around the rainfall, or you plan the irrigations based on how much rainfall you are getting, not only today or in the past few days, but also what are you likely to get in the next few days. So this is where the weather forecast that NIWA has been working on has been quite handy. If the farmers know it is going to be raining tomorrow, there is no reason to be irrigating today. You are doing two things. One, you don't spend the money applying the water on land. You save that water, leave it in the river or in the ground. Second one is by applying the water today, and if it rains tomorrow, that water is going to infiltrate into the soil below the root zone where the plants can use it. Also, it can leach the nutrients below the root zone. Then you are going to reapply the nutrients. So this project, with the second layer added to that, what we are trying to do is we are linking the past and the present to the future. The farmers get to know what happened in the last few days, what is happening today, and what is likely to happen in the next few days. Here we applied a co-innovation principle to do that. Before I go to co-innovation principles, I just want to take a step back. what we have been doing in the past and how we are changing towards the co-innovation or moving towards the co-innovation principles. As a biophysical or an engineering solution, what it is a linear approach. What we do is, as a researcher, we describe the problem based on the data that we have been collecting on the irrigation, water use, climate, and soil. Then, as scientists or researchers, we decide how we can take this data and we come up with a plan, use a technology such as weather forecast or soil moisture sensor, measure the demand, and go and tell the farmers, if you use these tools, this technology, we can make an informed irrigation scheduling. For instance, we can say it is going to be raining tomorrow, and you look at this map, look at this, go to this website, look at it, and you plan the irrigation accordingly. So what happens is most of the problem definition or identification or the constraint identification, everything defining the values and recommending the solution happens at a researcher level. The end user input comes at the end, and they get to use the technology. They give a feedback how well it is used, how well they are using it, whether they can add things to the technology, but they never are part of the original problem definition or identifying the constraints or telling the research scientists in this case, we think this is what the problem is and these are the constraints we have in the system. So you may have to take into account of those things when you design the technology or delivering the data or information to us. With a co-innovation principle, it is the stakeholder right from the start. The stakeholder in this case are research scientists, irrigation managers, farmers, regulatory agencies, other government agencies, and other research providers who are interested in this irrigation business and including the industry, how they can take this information and use it. In some ways, this is a very non-linear, multi-directional, multi-stakeholder approach, but very few quantifiable outputs. I'll let you know what, I'll tell you what that means. When we say irrigations are poorly scheduled, when we come up with an idea as a researcher, instead of going forward, going and identifying a technology to fix it and give it to the farmers, we take a step back and say, what are the causes? What are the controls on this one? What are the drivers and what are the constraints? Again, here we have an advantage. As a scientist, we don't have to sit and think about all those things. Here we get the stakeholders together right from the start, and they help us and we help them in this process to find out all these controls, causes, drivers, and constraints. Then we define together as a group what the problems are that we are trying to solve and what are our values and what are the solutions we want to be getting out of this one. Sometimes what happens is in this process, this is a process where you go back and forth. You monitor and evaluate and you review the process and you refocus your ideas and your processes and your methods. What happens is sometimes the end result keep on changing. The goalpost doesn't stay the same all the time. So that is why I say here the solution is a space rather than a point. It is not that we are going to a destination, but we are going towards a space. In this case, it could be improved water management. And some of the words that we use, the keywords that we use in this case is the trust, shared vision, shared value, being inclusive of all the stakeholders and listening to the views and all those things. One of the biggest thing with this co-innovation principle is since there is no defined or predefined endpoint and there are no controls, sometimes it is very difficult to monitor and evaluate how we are doing with these processes. Here I will go through this talk. When I go through this talk, at the end I will show you an example as how we are monitoring and evaluating what we are doing. Here is a hydrologist diagram of water management in New Zealand with a bit of a social science in it. It identifies the drivers and controls and the management decisions that they make. And if you look at this one, the form is coming in the bottom end. If you look at the axis, that is where we are working with this project. But the controls on this form, how they do the irrigation, when I talk about the irrigation, I'm talking about not individual irrigation events, but irrigation as a philosophy, as a strategy. That is not controlled at a farm gate or a farm scale. The controls are at different levels, starting from the regional to national, all the way going international sometimes. Because we got a clean green image. With the irrigation, we want to show that we are using the water the best way we could. that is a clean green image, we want to keep it, and there is an export dollars, and there is a production that we have to make sure that is happening to make us sustainable, and we can keep on doing the farming. Then when we come into the controls, we can look at what is the source of our irrigation water and how reliable they are, and what kind of technology and infrastructure that we have to be doing the best job that we could be doing. And the most important one in this case is a societal view on this irrigation and how we are doing it, and the perception of the farming practices, and particularly in this case, the irrigation practices. So we have to see all those things, and the ability of the farms, and the desire and the need of these farms to adapt their irrigation strategies and philosophy to match, as well as making their farming profitable. So when we set up this project, we had two set of questions. First one, as you say, is the co-innovation hypothesis, where we are suggesting a co-innovation or a co-learning approach can be applied to define, to identify stakeholders, define the problem, outline the constraints and values, and co-innovate solutions. Now here, stakeholders are the central to the research question. They start right from the start of the project. They don't come in the middle or in the end. And then the biophysical hypothesis, as a hydrologist, this is where I would be sitting up as a hypothesis, saying that improved and accessible knowledge of current soil conditions and forecast weather conditions would improve the irrigation practices at farm scale. If I give the farmers the right kind of data at the right times, in the right format, I believe the irrigation practices will improve. That is the biophysical hypothesis. I'll give you a brief background on this bimacro irrigation scheme. It is an irrigation scheme that started somewhere in the late 90s. It is one of the most successful irrigation schemes that started in the last 20-30 years. This is a farmer-owned and farmer shareholding company. It's not owned by anyone else as a corporate or a private company. It irrigates about 18,000 hectares of land north of Christchurch, taking water from the Biomacri River. I'll show you a picture of the irrigation scheme, the next one. They take water out of the Biomacri River during the summer for irrigation. As a part of the resource consent process, they have to apply certain conditions on when they can take the water and when they cannot take the water. When the river flow falls below a certain level, they cannot take the water for irrigation. This usually happens in the summer season, January or February, where the river flow can go down and they cannot irrigate their land as they were doing before. So that makes this irrigation scheme very unreliable. When we started this project, when we went and talked to all these farmers, one of the things that came up was the supplies are very unreliable. So any technology that we are going to use here has to take into account of that one. So the perception is when the supplies are unreliable, we can't do much about that. So this is the irrigation scheme. For those who are from outside New Zealand, someone like John, this is where it is in South Island, just north of Christchurch. This dashed line shows the approximate boundary of the Bimac irrigation scheme. We selected 5 farms for this pilot study. 4 of them are dairy farms and 1 of them is a cropping farm. And you will see from the scale I have shown there, the area is about 20 kilometer or 25 kilometer by 25 kilometer as you go along the north, south, and east, west. The farms that we selected are spread across the scheme. The reason why we did that way is we knew something about the scheme, and we know there is a gradient in rainfall and there is a gradient in evaporation across the scheme as you go from east to west. You get more rainfall on the western side of the scheme and you lose less water to evaporation on the western side of the scheme, and it changes on the eastern side. You get less rainfall, you lose more water to evaporation. Also going north-south from the top of the scheme towards the south of the scheme towards the river, the soils also change. The soils are more bony and more draining and less holding the water on the southern side closer to the river, and they are a lot more water holding in the northern side of the scheme. So there is a gradient in climate, there is a gradient in soil type, but the dairy farms are there everywhere. So we thought we will look at the entire scheme, and we also look at the gradient across the scheme by having these pilot farms spread across the scheme. At the start of the study, what we did is we went to all these 5 farms. We selected one centrifuge irrigator in this case. We put in a rain gauge, the soil moisture sensor, under one of the irrigators. So that rain gauge measures both rainfall and irrigation at 10-minute intervals, and the soil moisture sensor measures soil moisture and soil temperature at 10-minute intervals. And all the data, they come back to NIWA via telemetry every hour. The farmers are given access to this data 24/7 online, that they can see this data and for free. And also there is a weather station installed in one of the farms that we use to calculate the evaporative demand over the time. What I haven't shown in this slide is a set of lysimeters installed in one of the farms. Lysimeters are tools that we use in the field to measure the drainage of water below the root zone. So you put the rainfall on the top, or the irrigation on the top. This lysimeter will measure what is going through the root zone to the bottom of the root zone, below the root zone, as drainage. So we have one of those lysimeters installed in one of those 5 farms, and we use that data to see how much water we are losing as drainage. Aside from giving online access to the data to the farmers, we also send them an email every day at 5 o'clock with data from past to current, the last 7 days of drainage, evaporation, rainfall, irrigation, soil moisture, and soil temperature, as well as the next 2, 6, and 15-day rainfall, air temperature, wind speed, wind direction, and humidity forecast. At the start of the project, we had 5 farms, so we were sending it to 5 farmers, but with the number of farmers and farm managers and others involved in the scheme, the neighbors, now we got about 20 farm managers and owners getting this information. The farms that are not having this instrumentation in their farms, they can still use the weather forecast data for doing their irrigation and practicing their irrigation strategies. What we don't do as a part of this process is we give this information to the farmers, but we don't tell them it's going to be raining tomorrow, maybe you may want to hold off your irrigation. We want to leave that decision to the farmer, because we want them to understand what we are giving this data, and within their own constraints and their own limitations, how they can use this information. Instead of us enforcing the decisions on them, we just leave it to them to make the decision. So at this point, I'll take a pause to take any questions that you may have.
Great, thanks MS, and you've been doing a brilliant job. I've been really enjoying your presentation, and thanks for the little map showing me where the location of your research has been. That's really good. So I've got a few questions here for you. So the first one is, what's the one unexpected thing that you've learnt about why farmers are doing what they are doing in terms of irrigation? So what's been the surprise for you?
I'm going to go through one of the examples and show you that one. When I went and talked to them, they said the supplies are very unreliable. The river flow can go down at any time, so we won't be having enough water to irrigate. So we need to be irrigating whenever we have the water to irrigate. During one of the season, they went through a dry period when they didn't have enough water. And after about 4 or 5 weeks, they got all the water back. And the river flow was high up, and they could have taken the water and used it, but they didn't use it and they didn't irrigate. I was very surprised, because there is water to irrigate, why they were not irrigating it. Then when I went and talked to the irrigation scheme manager and then to some other farmers, one of the things that I learned is once they are past that stage where the crop is not going to respond to any irrigations, the best thing what they could be doing is to stop the irrigation. Don't irrigate anymore, because the grasses or the crop is not going to respond to that one. So this is one of the important things for us to know when we set up an irrigation strategy. You not only need to apply the water, but we need to apply it at the right time. If you miss that right time, we could be in trouble for that.
Okay, thanks MS. So I'm curious, before this project started, I'm guessing you probably didn't know a lot about co-innovation. So what did you think that co-innovation, why did you think co-innovation would be worth trying? So what attracted you to this?
In one of the earlier slides, I mentioned that the uptake of technology in this area has been quite stagnant. I talked to one of the irrigation consultant who has been in this area since 1980s and who has been still working in this area. One thing he mentioned is, the number of farms that he has been working, or the number of farmers he has been working in the last 30 years has remained the same. So it is not a question of a tech transfer. It is not a question of that we don't have the technology, or it's not that farmers don't know the technology. It's not that we don't have enough human power to put in all those instruments across the farms and start measuring the soil moisture sensor, soil moisture. It is something beyond that one. So it is not a tech transfer problem. It has to be something beyond the tech transfer. So then we started looking at what are the other potential possibilities to promote this idea of water management, irrigation management in these forms. So that is when the primary innovation project came up with the idea of co-innovation, where it's not the researchers, they have to find all the solutions and all the reasons for all these things. We can easily work with the farmers, and they will give you the answer for many of those things, or they will be able to help us with the evolution of this idea as how we can manage water better.
Excellent. Okay, I notice we've only got 10 minutes to go, so I'll let you move on to your second section. Thanks, MS.
Okay. Now let me get into some of the details of this project. How I talk about all the stakeholders all the time. How do we identify the stakeholders? How do we connect with them? And what do we do with these stakeholders? When we started this project, our stakeholders were pretty much the farmers and the YMAC irrigation scheme that we have been working with, apart from few researchers within NIWA and at Ag Research. So when we started the project, we had face-to-face interaction with the farmers, going around installing these soil moisture sensors and rain gauges, and explaining the farmers the data that we are collecting, explaining to them the weather forecast and how to use them. And there were quite a few email and phone interactions, farmers calling us, what's happening to this one, what does this one mean. Then there was an end of the irrigation workshop where we get all the farmers together, all the stakeholders together to talk about it. As we went through all this process, both Denise and I and Graham Ellie from NIWA, we also took the opportunity of wherever it is possible to go present talks about the work that we are doing. We went to the zone committee and we gave them a talk. We went to the local regional council, we gave them a talk. Wherever we could, we went and talked to them, and we identified quite a few stakeholders through that process. So the end of the irrigation season workshop, which I will go into more detail, that workshop now includes not only the farmers, we got people from other irrigation schemes, we got people from other research agencies, industry, ministries, as well as the zone committee and regulatory authorities. They also come and sit in those workshops to go through this process and help us with this process. The end of the season workshop, what I do is I gather the data, irrigation, rainfall, climate data from the entire irrigation season, which starts in September, ends in April. And I have this meeting in May. I get all the farmers, all the stakeholders into one room, show all the data to them. This is how much rainfall we got last year, and I go through individual farms. This is how much rainfall so and so applied, and this is how much irrigation they applied. This is how much irrigation these people applied. I just show them the information. I don't lead the discussion one way or other. I let the farmers to come back and ask questions, and we all sit together and talk about it. So the agenda for the meeting is just to show the data and discuss, but what we discuss is entirely up to the stakeholder group. They come up with questions, and they sometimes answer most of the questions that they come up with too. This forum is very good because this forum not only includes farmers, as I said, it includes other people, so you get to hear all the other views in the room. So most of the time they are different views, but not necessarily differing views. One thing that we established right at the start, very early in the project when we had this workshop, was, yes, we could be managing the irrigation better. So everyone agreed on that one. So how we do that, and what are the tools that we have to do that? So that is where the challenge is. And these workshops are very good. We had so far 3 workshops, one at the end of irrigation season 2012, one at the end of 2013, 2014, and one at the end of 2015. We had one. All these things, they happen usually during the month of May. One of the other things that we cannot undervalue from these workshops that is happening is the trust building process. How the researchers and the stakeholders and everyone trusting each other, the information that we are sharing in the room, how useful it is, and everyone is coming with a genuine interest to make a difference. So the trust building exercise has been very important. Maybe this is something we may not be able to measure all the time, but it has been quite a useful one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you two examples. Since this project is about co-learning and co-development and co-innovation, I want to show two examples. The first one, I want to talk about how the researchers, people like myself or Dennis or Gramely, we are learning. And the second example is going to be what we are giving to the farmers so that they can start thinking about it and they can make a difference. The first one is about, the example is about irrigation to drainage to dollars. When I ran the first year workshop in 2013, this was the kind of information I presented. So the forms 1, 2, 3, and 4. This is how much rainfall that they had and how much irrigation that they applied during the irrigation season 2012-13. When we started this project, when all the farmers that we talked to, they said there is a rainfall gradient in the scheme, that they know that, but they couldn't put their finger to it as how different it is across the scheme. When we put in the rain gauges in all these farms and measured the rainfall, we could say, look, the farm on the top is receiving 352 millimeters of rainfall, as opposed to the one on the bottom is receiving about 222 millimeters of rainfall. They are barely 20 to 30K apart. So this is something, when we showed this kind of data, and this is that they already know, and we confirmed what they already knew, it really started our trust building process, actually. Then they thought, oh, okay, this is something we see and you are also seeing, which is good. Let's start from here. So we are on the right track. At the end of that workshop, one of the things that came up was we were asked how much actually I'm draining in my farm, because you say the soil type is different across the scheme. Maybe one farmer can afford to do more irrigation than the other. How much are we draining? So that is the learning for us from the first workshops. When we went into the second workshop, we presented data like this one. In addition to rainfall and irrigation, we started giving them information on how much of the drainage happened during the irrigation season came from rainfall and how much of it came from irrigation. We wanted to separate these two because if they want to improve their irrigation, instead of giving one drainage number for the entire season, we wanted to separate the drainage coming from rainfall and coming from irrigation. The idea here is the rainfall drainage, we don't have any control, but the irrigation drainage, we do have control. If you don't irrigate at the time, if we hadn't irrigated at that time, we would not have had the drainage at the time. So that is the idea here. So we separated the irrigation drainage from the rainfall drainage, and we showed it to all these farmers in the second workshop in 2014 May. Again, there is a gradient that they can see. This gradient is happening because of two things. One is the differences in rainfall. Again, you can see farm 1 getting more rainfall, so it is draining a lot more water through drainage, as opposed to farm 5 in the bottom end, the other side of the scheme. They get less rainfall and they get less drainage, as opposed to farm 5 has to apply more irrigation because they get less rainfall. They end up losing more water as irrigation drainage. The farm 1 is losing less water. And it is, again, the difference is not only because of farm 5 applied more irrigation, they also don't have very good soils to hold that water that they have put in. So the irrigation strategy for farm 1 has to be very different from farm 5. In farm 1, they can afford to put in more water, so it is going to sit on the soil. But in the farm 5, they may have to put the water, whatever they're doing now, but they may have to do it very differently. Again, at the end of this workshop in 2014, we were asked, okay, it's all fine. I can see the difference between farm 1 and 5 and all those things. What does this mean in dollar terms? Is it really that big? You know, instead of draining 11 millimeters, if I'm draining, say, 107 millimeters, 10 times more, is it like I'm losing 10 times more money to drainage, through drainage and all those things? Is it something that we need to be really thinking about it? So at the end of the form, the year 2, the homework that we got was we had to convert this drainage into dollars. So here I started with an example for in year 3, which is 2015 workshop, where I put in a dollar value. It was rainfall drainage. This is $50 per hectare for every millimeter of water lost through drainage. If there's an irrigation drainage, it has to be $2 because with the irrigation there is a pumping cost and you are running a machinery and power cost and all those things. It also includes the cost, the drainage cost also includes the cost of nutrient leaching. It could be happening both with rainfall and irrigation drainage, and you have to replace the nutrient that has been leached, and there is a production loss, and there is a water and pumping cost which comes with the irrigation drainage. That's why it is slightly more. This number, when I prepared this one, it is based on my reading and my experience with these things. But when I presented these numbers to at the stakeholder workshop at the end of the season in May 2015, they were pretty much on the mark. They all agreed these numbers look right from their experience. What this cost doesn't, what they do not include is the differences between farms. Farm 1 could be growing all the grass, as opposed to Farm 5 could be buying feed externally and bringing it into the farm. We didn't look at that one. The second one is the cleanup cost. This is something, it may not happen today or tomorrow. It might happen in 5, 10, 20 years time. So we didn't take into account of that one. The last one is the lost opportunities to water trading. Even though I said the supplies are unreliable, there are cropping farmers in the scheme. They could be selling the water when they don't need it in January, February, and March to the dairy farmers and making money out of that one. But by not doing it, they could be losing the drainage there. So now you see on the red line, on the red marks, what is the dollar value associated with the drainage, irrigation drainage and rainfall drainage. So now it makes a lot more sense. Instead of just saying 11 millimeters of irrigation drainage to Farm 1 and 107 millimeters of irrigation drainage to Farm 5, now we can say Farm 1 could be losing about $24 per hectare for the entire irrigation season, as opposed to Farm 5 could be losing $214. So now it makes a lot more sense to them. Now they listen to this one. This one is again part of the trust building process. We could not have done this one on the year one because we are learning from the farmers as what exactly they are looking for as information, how they can make a change, and also they need to weigh the factors, whether they need to make a change, whether it's going to return anything on that one. So the second example I'm going to go through is the difference in irrigation practices between shoulder and peak seasons. This is one of the first things we again talked about in the year one workshop, where we are giving the weather forecast. I asked them, what is the best time to use the weather forecast? They say the shoulder season is good, which is starting somewhere between end of August to end of September or October, and again end of March to April. The peak season in between, starting November, December, all the way to February or even to March, they need the water and they will irrigate. They wouldn't be looking at any forecast. So they said the forecast is important right at the start and right at the end of the irrigation season. In the middle of the irrigation season, we don't need to be looking at the forecast because we know the grass is using all the water. We need to keep on supplying that water all the time. When you see what you see on the y-axis, on the vertical axis, on the top is the rainfall and irrigation. This is how I presented in the first year. I showed them the entire thing, and on the bottom it is the drainage dollars, not millimeters. This is how I did it in the third year when I showed them this graph. Then what I did is I separated the rainfall drainage, and I showed them this is how much rainfall that they received in 2014-15 irrigation season. The rainfall is the blue bars on the top, and the irrigation drainage in dollar terms is on the bottom. Then I showed them this is the irrigation drainage that they are getting. If you look at it, most of the drainage is happening during the peak season when they are not looking at anything. They don't look at the rainfall data, or they don't look at the forecast data, they don't even look at the soil moisture data here. They just use the supplies. Whenever they are available, they use it. That is the other thing. The perception is when the supply is there, you have to use it. But the farmers that we are working with here, they have a secondary supply, which is groundwater that they can use. So even when they look at the forecast, if it is going to rain tomorrow during the peak season, if they can hold off, if it doesn't happen, they can always use the secondary source, which is the groundwater, to do the irrigation. But in this case, they decided they are going to go out and do the irrigation, even if it means they're going to drain the water, nutrient, and all those things. So when we ended the workshop in 2014-15 irrigation season, this is where we left them with, look, maybe there is a place here where we can improve the irrigation strategy and irrigation philosophy. We may not be able to eliminate every one of these drainage events, but we might be able to eliminate the ones that are clearly visible, then we could be doing it. So this is where we left them. So when I go back in 2015-16 irrigation season workshop, we are going to talk more about it, and I'm going to learn more about what they thought about something like this one. So I think this is a good time for me also to finish this talk at this stage and take any questions from you. Thank you.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you so much, MS. That's been really good. Now, we are a bit short of time, folks, so I'm conscious that we should be finishing about now, but we do have a couple of quick questions. Now, MS, you may have touched on this, but some other folk would be interested to know if the accuracy of your forecasts is reported. So, for example, if we forecast rain yesterday and it arrived, so do you look back to see how the predictions line up with reality?
Yes, we do. As a part of a quality control process, quality assurance process, we look at internally at NIWA when we produce this forecast. We always look at what we forecasted and what we happened. Also, when the daily email update, when it goes to them, they can easily see what happened, what we forecasted yesterday, and what actually has happened in the farm on that day, because we are measuring the rainfall in their own farm, so they will be able to see that one. With the other parameters like soil moisture or soil temperature or air temperature, we also plot actually what we predicted and what actually happened, and that goes to the farmer as a part of the daily update. So there is some visibility of some of those, the exactness of the accuracy of the forecast, but that is something, it always comes up with farmers asking how exact these forecasts are, whether I can put my dollar on top of on this one and start irrigating accordingly. This is a process where the farmers are also learning how to look at the forecast and what kind of forecast that they can believe. That's why when I talked about eliminating drainage events, I'm not talking about eliminating every drainage events. There are some times when we are not going to forecast rainfall that it could be happening leading to a drainage event, and there are times that we could be forecasting rainfall but didn't happen, that farmers have to use the secondary source to irrigate. So there could be times that is happening, but we try and eliminate those things and do a quality assurance on that one.
Excellent. Thanks, MS. And the final question is, it's relating to the fact that you involved a lot of stakeholders. So what were some of the pros and cons for you with doing that?
The pros, first I'll start with the pros. The pros are like having a variety of stakeholders in the room was quite useful. For instance, when we had the workshop 2015, we had everyone from the irrigation practicing farmers all the way to regulators who are looking at how the irrigations are happening, how they should be happening. So it is good having all different stakeholders in the room and listening to each other. And we also learning from each other's perceptions and views of how irrigation is happening or how it should be happening. So it is a very good learning experience for everyone. And one of the other things that happened is when one of the farmers in the last meeting, he said, when I order the water, it is going to come to me, and if it rains tomorrow, I can't stop the ordering, because once I ordered, I have to take the water and use it. What will I do with that one? And spontaneously, another farmer, he stood up, he said, no, you can store it in my pond, and you can use it tomorrow. So that is the pros, actually, that they come up with a solution there too. In terms of cons, I can't see very many negative things about involving the stakeholders. The only challenge for us with the stakeholders is the time. Most of these farmers are quite busy. We can't meet them as often as we would like to, and we cannot bring all the stakeholders to the meeting at the time that everyone is available through these kinds of workshop. So time is the one that is working against all of us in some ways. That is the only disadvantage I see when you have multiple stakeholders. It's not stakeholders themselves are bringing anything that is negative to the group, but is getting them all into one room in one time. That is the most challenging thing.
That's a good response. Thanks, MS. And time is against us as well. So Denise, I might pass over to you to give a word of thanks.
Okay, well, thank you so much again, MS. That was a really great overview of the project. It's really exciting and cool to see all the different learnings that are coming through. I want to say thanks to everyone who's been coming along from the Primary Innovation Program, but also from outside the program. I hope this has given you a bit of a taste of what we do on these webinars, and that you'll register for the next one at the start of September, and I'll be sending out details of that shortly. It's a little bit of a moving feast, the who's speaking, but rest assured we will have some interesting people and presenters coming up for you for the rest of the year. And finally, just thanks again to John. Really appreciate all your help and being able to make all of this work and work really well and moderate it so that we can have some interaction and learn stuff along the way. So thank you so much, John.
Good-o, thanks Denise, my pleasure. I love webinars. It's a great way that we can learn without any of us actually needing to travel, and particularly in my case today. So thanks folks for joining us today, and I'll look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Cheerio for now.